And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about 5 Rolex Datejust alternatives. I think it's fair to say that in 2019, well now the end of 2019, there has been so much Rolex in our face over the last couple of years that I think some people out there are ready to see some alternatives, especially if the holiday season is coming up and maybe you don't want to put a Rolex on the wrist or you have one. There's some really great watches in this list that I know many of you will love. But once again, thank you so much for coming back. I really do appreciate it. Do not forget to like and subscribe. It really does help me. And you can also check out delraywatch.com, where I know someone out there is looking for this watch. I can't remember who. We usually record that, but we missed this here. This is the anniversary, the blue dial Zin chronograph. If you're the guy that knows this, you know what it is. You can see it at delraywatch.com. I really like Zin recently. They were off of my radar, and they really should have made this list. But I'll be doing a video in the very near future on Zin, because I do think that they deliver some of the best value out there in sports and tool watches. So the first one, let's jump right into this one. This is the most recent version or iteration of the IWC On Junior. Now, if you see the picture here, you know that this does not look like your normal Genta or Genta inspired sports watch, which most of the On Junior lineup is, right? You got the fully integrated bracelet or strap with the watch, and you've got that whole kind of AP Royal Oak Nautilus feel. You know what I mean? This is a little bit different. They recently released this within the last year or so, and I really enjoy this one because it does provide that kind of middle ground between sports watch and breaching just ever so slightly into that kind of dress watch Datejust area, if you know what I mean. This one is 40 millimeters. It features, the IWC's take on a movement that's in many other watches out there. It's the Sellita SW300. And you don't see a Cyclops here, which of course it's missing compared to the Rolex Datejust, but what you do see and what I do enjoy a whole lot about this is the thick lume pips. When you see there, right to the sides of the marker, there's the lume pips, and that's something you don't see in watches a whole lot anymore, but that's the way that they kind of handled lume with vintage watches, right? Vintage Datejust, they featured those lume pips. A lot of the times now they fall off, but it really is reminiscent and feels like something a lot older in the Datejust lineup, but certainly much newer considering all of the specs and features, and of course, a lot of the case design styling cues. The next one, number 2, is the Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra 150 meter. Now, the Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra is a newer kind of offshoot of the Seamaster product line. It was supposed to be, just that, a Datejust alternative. You can see in some of their earlier models, including some of their quartz models, which, Rolex does not do, with the exception of the now vintage Oyster quartz. They really, Omega, when they came out with this, they knew exactly the segment they were taking on. And while recently they have kind of carried off to the side from that core product, what they have with the 150M on the bracelet is very much a really great Datejust alternative. Now, of course, you'll notice in the picture that the date is at the 6 o'clock and not the 3 o'clock. So it kind of gives you a little bit something different if you're the guy that likes something different. I personally don't really care where the date is as long as it looks good in relation to everything else on the watch and the dial, and certainly the Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra 150M does a pretty great job. If you haven't played with current generation Aqua Terras, even though the demand is very low, which I think is off-putting for some people in the era of investment watches, if you know what I mean, I think that they do a really great job with the watch head to toe, and the bracelets on these are excellent. I tried one on at the Omega Boutique here in Aventura in South Florida, and I think they do a really great job. The watch feels very nice, and you can tell that Omega is really up there with Rolex, and the history of where Omega came from should really be, cast aside, and you should look at this in kind of that tunnel. And I'll say lastly about this watch, and it seems like I'm a Omega fanboy here, is that they do a really great job with their rubber bracelets for this watch. So if you like rubber bracelets, rubber straps, check that out. Now, number 3 on the list, we're going to get the Grand Seiko guys that will be happy about this, but you'll say you wish I mentioned the spring drive. I know it already, but what I have here is the SBGR 315, which is their 40mm automatic version of your classic Datejust-esque watch. Now, what I really like about this specific example, especially considering it's one of Grand Seiko's more approachable automatic watches. Sure, you can get into quartz that they still make, but the 9F line with their quartz movement, which is very good in its own. But when you get into something like this at $4,700 retail, maybe get 30% off discount, you're looking at such a great, in my opinion, bargain luxury watch, because what Grand Seiko does that not all of the larger producers will do is they put so much attention to detail in their more approachable models as their models that are twice as expensive. So for an automatic watch with a 72-hour power reserve with something like their 9S65 caliber, which is their most recent rendition of a rework of their classic movement that they redesigned in, I believe, the 80s, you can see in the picture here that they put a lot of attention to detail in not only the specs of how the movement runs, but of course how it looks. And that's something that I really think watch collectors and watch geeks like us can really appreciate, is that they're giving you something at a much lower price point that not a lot of manufacturers are willing to invest in. And I can appreciate that. The picture really explains it all. Now, this next one, number 4, is the Tudor 1926. Now, if you're a Tudor guy, you're a Tudor collector, whatever you want to call it, you probably might not be familiar of this specific model. I've only held this once, and we took it in on trade by chance, and I've not seen it again, even at the store. This has a retail price of $1,900, but you'll see it right away. It's a little bit more classic. It really feels more from where Tudor came from originally than where Tudor is considered today with all of their sports watches. This features kind of that Jubilee-esque bracelet that Tudor used in the late 80s and early 90s, even in some of their 36mm Submariner lines. And I think the bracelet is really nice. And in a watch like this, where we could kind of push the watch in either direction from dress watch to sports watch, the bracelet really makes it that kind of middle ground. And that's what we're talking about, these middle ground Datejust watches. So, of course, it's vintage inspired. This one has the blue numbers on it, which I find to be incredibly attractive, put against that white patterned background of the watch. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments below. I find that this watch and this watch line, the whole 1926 family from Tudor, is incredibly polarizing. So I would love to know what you think about this in the comments below. And consider you can get this gray market for maybe $1,200. I think it's a bargain play. Let me know what you think below. And lastly, one of my personal favorite classic watches out there currently is the Gerard Perrigo 1966 in 40mm on a bracelet. Now, the 1966 line is inspired by where Gerard Perrigo came from. A lot of dress watches, a lot of pseudo dress watches, a lot of sports watches called the Seahawk that looked like dress watches today. Dress watches, you get it. And this watch is no exception, but when you put it on the bracelet, it just feels more sporty, right? That's kind of how it works. But this one's on the list because it's very under the radar. And as a Datejust alternative, you might be looking for an under the radar higher end watch. And considering this has a retail of roughly $8,600, you can get it much less. We're talking in the same realm of price comparatively to that of the Rolex Datejust, depending on the model. Now, this is going to have a much more sophisticated, a much more refined movement, a see-through display caseback featuring a sapphire crystal, but it's going to be a much higher caliber, literally, of watch than you would be finding at a Datejust. Of course, Rolex, they produce a very nice, very high-end watch, but when we talk about Gerard Perrigo, we're talking about steps above just in what they do and a lot of the mantras, and a little bit less of standard fit and finish, which is what Rolex is known for, and a little bit more attention and care to detail. Not saying anything negative about Rolex, just a different kind of way that they handle their business in producing watches. What do you think about Gerard Perrigo? Personal favorite brand of mine, but I would really love to know what you think about them as well in the comments below. So, what do you guys think? Was there anything on this list that maybe you haven't heard of? Or maybe there are some watches that you like a whole lot more than the Datejust? Or maybe you are staying true to the Datejust in this category? Of course, comments, discussions, questions below. It's so much fun. So guys, thanks so much. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.